Senate Bill 88 would create a hybrid defined benefit system for public employees and teachers. Mr. President, I want to emphasize from the get-go, this is not a return to the pension system that we had previously. That was a gold-plated system. It was expensive, particularly the healthcare costs. Mr. President, there's actually some senators on this floor that are part of that former retirement system. But this hybrid system, this hybrid pension system, is updated and incorporates the best practices that have been proven in other states. It shares the risk, Mr. President, across three beneficiary groups: the employer, the employee, and retirees. This is unique, Mr. President. It's actually, this idea is employed by other states as well, but here in Alaska, this would be a unique pension system. It is a proposal for at reasonable costs and fair benefits, but it is not a return to the previous system. So why would we even do this? Mr. President, I don't think we need to explain to each other, but perhaps the public needs to be reminded we have a problem these days. Snow is not being cleared from roads. This is Alaska. We get snow. But we're having trouble with that basic service because we don't have enough operating engineers driving those snow plows, enough mechanics repairing those every day after the hard wear, diesel mechanics, welders, basic things, Mr. President. Teachers, we are hearing from school districts constantly that they have one, maybe two, maybe three applicants for each job opening, and even then those applicants may not be qualified. In fact, Mr. President, in many job descriptions, they're lowering the qualifications. Our Department of Corrections is having difficulty hiring correction officers. Mr. President, they recently lowered the qualifications of age to 18 years old. That frightens me, Mr. President. An 18-year-old being placed in a correction institute as a correction officer, that seems pretty scary to me. We actually see recently in the Finance Committee a review of the corrections in various parts of our state government. There's a 27% vacancy at Spring Creek Prison. This is a maximum security prison, Mr. President. I think those correction officers should be fully staffed. Youth correction facilities, 25 to 42% vacancies. The Alaska Marine Highway. We saw last summer, even now, inadequate schedules because they don't have enough staff. Mr. President, we're seeing increased costs because of overtime. This overtime is being done mainly by senior staff. Burnout, low morale, all of that exists. Statewide, we're seeing an impact on our economy. We're seeing population leaving the state for the past 11 years. That population typically is aged between 18 and 64 years old. That's our working age population. It has been identified that people that were born here 20 years ago are no longer here. A third of our high school graduates who leave the state never return. Last night, in the governor's address, he talked about Iceland. So let's talk about Iceland. Many of the graduates from their secondary education leave that country for education, but they come back to Iceland. Mr. President, that's what we need to be doing, is drawing our students back. Training costs are high. Public safety, if only 1% of public safety employees were leaving the job and we were having to retrain, it would cost somewhere over $4 million. But in fact, public safety is experiencing about 6% non-retirement separations. So just multiply that 4 million by 6. Mr. President, the same with education. ICER has estimated that it costs $20 million to actually recruit and prepare all the teachers that we need who have left the system. We're having errors, Mr. President. All the churn in employment, bringing on new people, we're seeing a lot of errors being made. You know, I listened to the single audit a few months ago, and the state auditor, our legislative auditor, identified in multiple places of that single audit where errors were being made in finance reporting to the federal government because of either inadequate staff or poorly trained staff in our departments. That's costing us something, Mr. President. So we have a problem. Now, we've tried some solutions. I think we're all aware of the millions that are being spent in hiring bonuses, and we still have unfilled positions. We have data actually from the Division of Retirement and Benefits, actual data from the ARM board, that's the Alaska Retirement Management Board, that shows that at 5-year vesting, that's how long a person has to be employed under the defined contribution system that we have right now, they are fully vested. They can remove the money they have placed into that account as well as the employer's money. At 5 years, they're pulling their money out. 90% of the money leaving our defined contribution fund is being pulled out at 5-year vesting. That equates to $9.3 million a month from people leaving public service under the defined contribution system. I think that pretty much illustrates the churn, the turnover that we're experiencing. So, Mr. President, it's obvious we're losing key public employees to states with lower costs of living and who have a pension. We see that in the census data, Mr. President. We're seeing that Alaska residents are moving to Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, and Colorado, all places with certainly a more affable climate, but higher wages and pensions. Defined contributions, the defined contribution retirement system is actually designed to incentivize that mobility, Mr. President. We have the data to prove it, but it also, when a state or an employer has that type of system, it actually communicates a low commitment to employees, treating them almost like day employees, day workers. Whereas a defined benefit system communicates a long-term commitment to an employee, that this employer wants to attract good people, wants to keep them, and actually cares about them after retirement. Mr. President, that's what we want to do. The state's actuary is Buck Actuarial, and they actually have stated several times before the Senate Finance Committee the acknowledgement that defined benefit pension systems incentivize recruitment and certainly incentivize retention. So, one of the other concerns I have, Mr. President, about the defined contribution is for the women. Mr. President, women are the most vulnerable to retirement poverty. The reason being, first of all, we're paid less typically for the same job. In addition, we are the ones that take time off to take care of family members. And, Mr. President, we live longer, which means that we need more funds, right? There's ample data out there that women, particularly, are at very high risk to poverty in their elderly years. So, Mr. President, our defined contribution system is not serving our Alaska women who are working in public service. So, this bill is proposed as a solution to that. Again, it is a hybrid. So, this will allow employees to choose. Current day employees who are right now in the defined contribution system will have the opportunity to choose, when this goes into effect, to join the defined benefit, transfer their money from defined contribution and their years of service into defined benefit, or maybe they want to stay in defined contribution. That's fine. They certainly can do that. This pension system combines, as I said, the best practices from other states. It employs a minimum floor of 90% funding. So it will have to remain 90% funded at all times. This is considered the gold standard for funding for pension plans. All beneficiaries will contribute if that funding falls below that 90%. So employers will have their contribution adjusted. At the same time, employees will have their contribution adjusted upward. And interestingly, Mr. President, retirees will need to contribute more. So, how will retirees contribute more? Retirees in this plan will have a post retirement pension adjustment. So, this is an inflation adjustment that retirees get. Each year, as inflation goes up, their pension goes up slightly. If the pension fund falls below 90%, they will get less of the PRPA, post retirement pension adjustment. In addition, if those retirees choose to live outside of Alaska, automatically they will only receive 50% of a post-retirement pension adjustment, or PRPA. This bill has no COLA in it, cost of living adjustment. Again, that was something that was put in the bill to keep the costs down. The cost of living adjustments can certainly add to cost. Right now, we have a 5-year vesting that is maintained in the bill. We have medical coverage that is the same as the present day defined contribution system. We retain a health reimbursement account for the employees. This is 3% contributed by employers into an account for each employee that they can then use after retirement to buy health insurance if there's a gap between entire retirement and Medicare. We don't have medical coverage during that time, Mr. President. So if someone retired at age 60 and didn't qualify for Medicare until age 65, they would have to buy their own insurance for that piece. That's again a cost saver here. But that's what the HRA, Health Reimbursement Account, is for. The death and disability is the same as present day defined contribution. And as I said, the current defined contribution employees will have that 6 months to make a decision, stay in defined contribution or go to defined benefit. They'll make that decision for themselves and their families, their family situation. Mr. President, the data that we have from Buck Consultants that was shared at the Alaska Retirement Management Board in September indicates that defined benefit is less expensive than defined contribution, Mr. President, by multiple percentage points, approximately 4 to 5 percentage points less expensive for a defined benefit pension system. This is a big deal, Mr. President. We believe that there will be direct costs from recruitment and recruitment and retention efforts. You know, we're doing a lot of bonuses right now. We're spending a lot of money just training people. There will be cost savings there. There'll be direct savings and higher returns and less risky return from a defined benefit assets. There'll be indirect savings, greater productivity of our employees, more reliable public services, increased morale, lower administrative costs from all the recruitment and retraining, and retained Alaska residents, Mr. President. That builds our economy. Buck Actuary actually stated repeatedly that defined benefit retains employees, that's actually its function, is to retain employees. That means we retain the experience, the skills, and the knowledge of our valuable public employees, Mr. President. The direct cost savings estimate is approximately $76 million a year. Indirect cost savings are the quality of life, things like that, Mr. President. We have a fiscal note attached to the bill. Members have that on their desk. The fiscal note was prepared by an actuary named Chiron. That actuary was hired by the Finance Committee itself. And Buck stated last week at the Senate's finance table that they agreed with the numbers that Chiron had derived. Chiron had worked with Buck Actuary to actually share the assumptions and that therefore arrive at a very collaborative actuarial note. We will have an actuarial note from Buck in the next few weeks. Buck actually works for the Alaska Retirement Management Board, who has a meeting coming up they're a little busy right now, but Chiron's actuary actually collaborated with Buck. So, Mr. President, it's important that we understand that Alaskans are leaving. We are losing state services. We're losing that knowledge, skills, and experience. We need to turn our economy around, Mr. President. If we want to see more cranes, as the governor said last night, those cranes mean people are investing here. It means they have trust that state government here is stable and effective. That means we've got to have departments that can issue those building permits. We've got to have departments that can keep the roads cleared, that can transport materials that are needed by those investors, that our schools are there so that families moving here know their children will be educated well. All of this will be built on a foundation of a defined benefit retirement system, Mr. President. So again, I just emphasize this is not the previous pension system. This is a brand new hybrid system that is specially designed to keep the costs down, but yet still have a reasonable pension retirement for our workers. It is updated with best practices, reasonable costs, and fair benefits. Mr. President, in conclusion, I want to emphasize something. I'm a Republican. As Republicans, we believe in containing government costs. We believe in being data-driven. We believe in having responsible government that will provide core services. Mr. President, right now, the current policy of defined contribution, there's a plethora of data showing that it is not working, that actually the employees that are invested in that defined contribution are earning far less for their retirement than in the defined benefit system. We need to correct this. We need to put efficiency back in our state government by reducing the constant churn of employees and allow these public service agencies to actually do the work that's needed. So, Mr. President, I urge a yes vote on Senate Bill 88.